Hi, Davis friends. We are back for chapter 3 of The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary. When we last left, Ralph the Mouse had discovered the toy motorcycle that the boy left in the hotel room, and he tried to ride it and he fell into the trash barrel. So now he's going to try and figure out what to do. Chapter 3, Trapped. Even though Ralph woke up feeling sick and dizzy, his first thought was of the motorcycle. He hoped it was not broken. He sat there at the bottom of the wastebasket until the whirly feeling in his head stopped and he was able, slowly and carefully, to stand up. He stretched each aching muscle and felt each of his 4 legs to make certain it was not broken. When Ralph was sure that he was battered but intact, he examined the motorcycle. He set it upright and rolled it backward and forward to make sure the wheel still worked. One handlebar was bent and some of the paint was chipped off of the rear fender, but everything else seemed all right. Ralph hoped so, but there was no way he could figure it out until he figured out how to start the engine. Now he ached too much to even try. Wearily, Ralph dragged himself over the wall of his metal prison and sat down beside the apple core to rest his aching body. He leaned back against the side of the wastepaper basket, closing his eyes, and thought about his Uncle Victor. Poor nearsighted Uncle Victor. He too had landed in a metal wastepaper basket, jumping there quite by mistake. Unable to climb the sides, he had been trapped until the maid came and emptied him out with the trash. No one knew for sure what had happened to Uncle Victor, but it was known that trash in the hotel was emptied into an incinerator. Ralph felt sad and remorseful thinking about his Uncle Victor getting dumped out with the trash. His mother had been right after all. His poor mother, gathering crumbs for his little brothers and sisters, while he, selfish mouse that he was, sat trapped in a metal prison from which the only escape was to be thrown away like an old gum wrapper. Ralph thought sadly of his comfortable home in the mouse hole. It was a good home, untidy but comfortable. The children who stayed in room 215 usually left a good supply of crumbs behind, and there was always water from shirts hung to drip dry beside the wash basin. It should have been enough. He should have been content to stay home without venturing out in the world looking for speed and excitement. Outside in the hall, Ralph heard footsteps and Matt the bellboy saying, "These new people in 215 and 216, somehow they got the idea that there are mice in the hotel. I just opened the window and told them the management would not stand for it." Ralph heard a delighted laugh from the second-floor maid, a college girl who was working for the summer season. "Mice are adorable, but just the same, I hope I never find any in my rooms. I'm afraid of them." There were 2 kinds of employees at the Mountain View Inn: the regulars, none of them young, and the summer help, who were college students working toward tourist season. "If you don't like mice, you better stay away from that knothole under the window in room 215, advised Matt. The sound of voices so close made Ralph more eager than ever to escape. "No," he shouted, his voice echoing the middle chamber. "I won't have it. I'm too young to be dumped out with the trash." In spite of his aches, he jumped to his feet, ran across the wastepaper basket, and leaped against the wall, only to fall back in a sorry heap. He rose, backed off, and tried again. There he was on the floor of the wastebasket a second time. It was useless, utterly useless. He did not have the strength to tip over the wastebasket. Ralph was not a mouse to give up easily. He considered his problem a moment before he rolled the motorcycle over to the wall of the wastebasket. Then he seized the apple core by the stem and dragged it over to the motorcycle. By putting his shoulder under the stem end, he managed to raise the core until it was standing on its blossom end. But when he put his front paws around it and tried to lift it, he found that he could not. The core was too heavy to lift up onto the seat of the motorcycle. Ralph was disappointed, but when he stopped to think it over, he saw that even if he could manage to get the apple core on top of the motorcycle, it still would not be high enough to allow him to climb out of the wastebasket. Bruised and defeated, Ralph dropped the core and decided that he might as well be thrown out with the trash on a full stomach as an empty one. He took a bite of the apple and felt a little better. It was the best food he had eaten in several days, juicy and full of flavor, and much better than the damp crumbs the last guest had left behind. He took several more bites and settled down to a hearty meal, saving the seeds for dessert. 2 ant scouts appeared at the rim of the basket. "Go away," said Ralph crossly, because he did not like to eat food crawling with ants, and because it embarrassed him to be seen in such a predicament. The ants left as silently as they had come. When Ralph had eaten his fill of the apple, he curled up beside the core. He only hoped that someone might happen to drop a Kleenex over him. It was bad enough to be carried to one's doom in a wastebasket, but to be carried to one's doom by a shrieking maid was unthinkable. There was one tiny ray of hope. If someone did happen to drop a Kleenex over him, he might just have a chance to jump and run when the maid tipped the basket up to empty it into the incinerator. The thought that the boy was sure to miss his motorcycle and start looking for it kept Ralph tossing and turning behind the apple core until, stuffed and exhausted, he finally fell asleep. I'll start chapter 4, which is called Keith. Ralph did not know how much time had passed before he was awakened by the lamp on the bedside table shining down on him. He squeezed himself into the tiniest ball possible, wrapped his tail around his body, and tried to make himself as thin as the apple core. "My motorcycle," shouted the boy, the very first thing. "Somebody stole my motorcycle." "Uh-oh," thought Ralph. "It won't be long now." "Nobody stole your motorcycle," answered the boy's mother from 216. "It's around someplace. You just mislaid it. You can find it in the morning. You'd better get ready for bed now." "No, I didn't mislay it," insisted the boy. "I put it right here on the table by my sports car." "You'll find it someplace," said his mother, not much interested. Boys were always losing things. While Ralph cowered beneath the apple core, Keith opened up the drawer of the bedside table and slammed it shut. He jerked back the bedspread, yanked the pillows off the bed, and threw them back. Then he got down on his hands and knees and looked under the bed and table. Ralph wrapped his tail more tightly around his body. "Here it comes," he thought. The boy's face appeared at the opening at the top of the wastebasket. Ralph's heart raced like a motor. "Ha!" said the boy to himself. "Here it is. I wonder how it got in here." His hand came down into the wastebasket to seize the motorcycle and lift it out. Still leaning over the wastebasket, he examined the bent handlebar and chipped paint. "That's funny," he remarked out loud. "It must have rolled off, but I don't see how it could." The boy did a natural thing for a boy to do. He looked into the wastebasket again. Ralph closed his eyes tight and waited. He wished he had not eaten so much of the apple core. If he had not been so greedy, the core would have been thicker and he would have been thinner. "Hey," whispered the boy, obviously very much surprised. "How did you get in here?" He was careful to keep his voice lower than the sound of the breezes in the pines outside the window. Ralph did not move. He was grateful to the boy for not touching the apple core, even though it was really no protection at all. "Psst," whispered the boy. "Are you asleep?" Still Ralph remained motionless, except for a slight quiver of his whiskers, which he was unable to control. The boy was silent, but the mouse could feel the rhythmic drifts of his breathing. The boy must be thinking. But what was he thinking? That was what was worrying Ralph. "No," said the boy to himself. "No, it couldn't be." "Couldn't be what?" wondered Ralph. Couldn't be what? Wondered Ralph, who was beginning to feel cramped from crouching behind the apple core. "Hey, wake up," whispered the boy. The last thing Ralph wanted to do. "Come on," pleaded the boy. "I won't hurt you." Ralph considered. After all, what did he have to lose? If he stayed in the wastebasket, he was almost certain to get dumped into the incinerator. He might as well come out from behind the core. If he did, he might find some opportunity to escape. Cautiously, he moved his head from his paws, and he opened one eye. The boy was smiling down at him. Encouraged, Ralph opened the other eye and lifted his head. "That's the stuff," encouraged the boy. "Now come on. Tell me, did you or didn't you ride my motorcycle off the bedside table?" This took Ralph by surprise. He had not expected the boy to guess what had happened. "Well, yes, I guess you might say that I did," confessed Ralph, rubbing his aching muscles. I'll stop there for today, and we'll pick up tomorrow and find out what happens.